I'm Kia.
And I'm Florence.
And this is Melanin
in Medicine.
So today we have an amazing member of our faculty, and she will be our guest. Dr. I don't want to ruin your name because I'm already a fan. So can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Natabona Mabachi, and I'm faculty in family medicine in the research division, and I do a lot of work in public health. And my work is very gender-based, so I do work around HIV and mothers and preventing transmission of child to parent to child. I do work around cervical cancer prevention. I also do a lot of implicit bias work, education work, both with medical students and with faculty. And so I do this work in the community, I do this work in academic settings, and I also do this work internationally in Africa.
That is so awesome.
That is amazing.
And
yeah,
where in Africa do you do it? Just like
in Kenya. Thanks for asking that question.
Let the girls know. Yeah, we honestly so the way we kind of met Dr. Mabachi, herself and another faculty member led an implicit bias course in our intro to doctoring. It was probably the first or second week of medical school. And up until that point, we had already realized that there was 7 Black students of 200. We'd already realized that we might be more intensely marginalized if we were to be that problematic student. And we kind of already had it set in our heads, you not only have to perform to the standard, but you have to excel if you want to avoid being the stereotype, all of these things. And then Dr. Mabachi had this class where she was let me make you realize your privilege, and then I'm going to hold you accountable. And it was so moving. We were wow, so they have them here. So those are here.
A lot of the things that she addressed in her class were a lot of the things we've been talking about amongst ourselves, and didn't know how to bring those topics about medicine and inequalities in health and implicit bias to our classmates. So we were so glad that she did this, and the way you even presented the information was just so beautifully thought out. We were we love her.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Okay.
Cheers. So usually we have our guests, when we have a guest on the show, we have them give us a elders elevations, a quote or something they live by. Do you have anything a mantra or even a Bible verse? Or?
I do, and I have several, and I use them depending on the mood I'm in.
Okay.
Sometimes when I'm doing my work, I'm just gung-ho and all about it and feeling it. And then other times you get so discouraged and you're does it even matter that I'm here? Does it even matter that I'm doing this? And so I have 2 main things that I think about. And one is by Black activist Audre Lorde, and the quote goes something like this: when we speak, we're afraid our words will not be heard or welcomed. But when we're silent, we're still afraid. So it's better to speak. So even in those moments when I don't want to speak, when I think I'm not being heard, I think about what she's saying and I'm okay, it's better that I say it or I do it or I try and teach it, because it might, even if it impacts one person, I don't know who that person is going to be and what they're going to do with it. So that's one of the ones. And then the other one is something that I sort of just gathered from a lot of my readings and listenings to Brene Brown, which is, I am enough, I was enough, I will always be enough.
Oh, I like that.
That's good.
Yeah.
A lot.
Mm-hmm.
I might need to get that quote on paper. No, we got it recorded. So usually we do our I'm forgetting our segments. So we have Mahoney messages, and we've gotten a lot of different messages just within the past couple weeks, and mainly because it's application season, as well as a lot of people are kind of I'm preparing for the MCAT. What do you suggest?
How our podcast and now YouTube channel has helped like minority students get into medical school. So that's something, when we see those messages, that makes us so happy.
Oh my goodness,
we
so
always
happy.
screenshot them and send them to each other. So
did we announce the Penny Proud got in the forward?
Oh yeah,
I've heard.
Yes.
So in one of our prior episodes, we had a young woman write into us, and she had a question over, I want to say like her personal statement or something like that. And so we read about it, and we gave her the name Penny Proud. And Penny Proud made it into 4 of the schools that she interviewed at.
Hey.
And yeah, so shout out to Penny Proud. She emailed us a while back, and I don't know if we gave her flowers, but here you go, girl. So
that is so amazing.
Yeah, it was really everything we needed. I think she emailed us that like around the time we were like in the COVID like hype, and we were like stuck inside and annoyed. And I was like, man, I needed this. Like, that's motivation. Exactly. Yeah.
I think it's so amazing that you guys were there to support other people of color applying to med school, because that is one of the biggest obstacles. Yeah. I think it's not inherent knowledge. It's not stuff that you're going to necessarily get from your high school or from your counselors or from whatever. And even if you do, they don't understand the nuances that people of color experience systemically to try and get into institutions like med school, grad school, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It's tough.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah. And it's like something you've never even tried before.
No.
Like, you're absolutely right. I feel like a lot of people, even you talk about how your mom was like, you told her your first MCAT score. She was like, oh, that's great. And you were like, no.
She was not. She was so proud of me. I give her, she's still proud. And I'm like, well.
You're like, you don't even know how to explain it. It's like, I don't expect you to know this. So yeah.
I had a student who was applying for residency programs. And she said, I have a friend whose mom spent the time doing the applications for her.
Wow.
And she's like, I don't have that. I don't have that kind of support. It's a full-time job applying to residencies, and people don't get that.
So the next segment after interviews is kind of our stepping stone. So kind of we're jumping into like the main segment. So which one do you want to start with?
Well, so Dr. Mabachi, you introduced yourself. Do you want to kind of give any background or anything like that? I mean, I feel like your introduction was beautiful, but if there's any more you'd like to include or anything like that?
No, I think that I've said all about me in a nutshell. I guess I just want to add that I am originally from Kenya, so I am a person of color. And my background is pretty unique in that I grew up in a country that has a colonial history, but it's a Black country. I left home at 18 and went to England, which is a country that colonized us. Mm-hmm. So, and did my undergrad and my first master's degree there. And that was surreal in itself. And then came to America. So I've had different experiences globally and what it means to be Black in different contexts. And I bring that with me when I have my discussions and talk about bias and talk about institutional racism and accountability and things like that.
That is so rich. Awesome. Like your experiences and just like how much you can at least say you've seen. A lot of people have this like notion of like, oh, we should do better and we should do this, but you have like so much scope to have like seen these things, seen them implemented, seen them go wrong, and know
right.
Man, shout out to it.
And then one thing that kind of, I guess, rubs me the wrong way is sometimes I feel like when like privileged groups like kind of try and help like other groups, they kind of like don't have their experiences, or they've never like taken the time to do their research or like even get to know these issues. So the fact that like you're so diverse and like you know about a lot of these issues and you can bring that to the table, I think that speaks like loads on your experience. So
yeah, thanks. And it's just a little experience, and I think people who try and help sometimes are meaningful, but there's a point where help becomes harmful. Mm-hmm. And folks don't recognize that. Mm-hmm.
I have one thing. So we do want to highlight current racial injustices. That's like the meat of this kind of discussion. And so I'll just follow the questions, and then if we have time, I'll toss my extras. One of the main things that we wanted to talk about was how medicine can benefit from social change.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a big question. And I guess I'll talk about it in public health. We talk about the social ecological model. I think one of you has an MPH. Is that, or
I wanted still in the middle
you
of
wanted one? So in public health, we use the social ecological model to tackle health issues at different levels of society. So going from the individual to relational, community, organizational, to the larger social area. And so I always approach this issue from that point of view. So on the individual level, one of the things I recognize is that as people of color in the field of medicine, be you becoming a physician or me, sort of a PhD working in research, it's mentally exhausting at times. And I want to acknowledge that for you guys. Living, working, playing in a country that has had systemic racism for centuries and has relied on systems of oppression is both physically and mentally exhausting. And I think that people need to acknowledge that out loud.
Mm-hmm. That's real. And it makes white people feel guilty when you talk about that.
Yeah. And I know one thing we've been experiencing with everything that's going on is just because we do have such little numbers of Black students at our school, we're being pulled in all different directions to be that voice for Black students and for change at our school. And it's exhausting. Like,
So
we're exhausted.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. It's exhausting. And I was just listening to a podcast, and if you guys haven't listened to it, with Brene Brown and Ibram Kendi, Dr. Ibram Kendi, he's just awesome. And he talks about how when white people feel guilty or white people feel shame, he says you are actually both a victim and a victimizer. You are a victim of a system that led you to believe for its own benefit that Black people were less than. So back in the 1800s, white slave owners, it was to their benefit to have slaves. So they created a narrative around Black people that Black people weren't as smart, Black people were lazy, Black people were dangerous, Black people, all of these things, and convinced other white people to join, right? Mm-hmm. That narrative. And so people have perpetuated that narrative till today. So when white people are made to examine it more deeply and realize how they've kind of been hoodwinked, they feel ashamed.
Yeah.
But they were a victim to begin with, and their ancestors were a victim. But in perpetuating the system, they're also victimizing others. And to go back to your point about how it's exhausting, research actually shows that there's biological and physical effects on students of color. So biologically, we know that there's stress, that the cortisol levels are high amongst Black, right? Cumulative stressors over the years, over generations, is actually built into our very DNA. Mm-hmm. We can't ignore that. There's emotional effects, and how that shows up is in poor self-image, diminished self-confidence, mental health issues, anger, frustration, anxiety. We have cognitive effects, and that's really where we start double thinking about our experiences, and we're like, did that happen because I was Black? You have decreased focus, you experience stereotype threat, where people's beliefs about you start internalizing and believing them.
Mm-hmm.
So all of this is real, for sure. And if you say, when stuff happens to other Black people, we experience secondhand trauma.
Yeah. Wow.
As well. So then what can our institutions do better?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
because
acknowledging. That's like number one.
Hello. Right.
And with only 7 people to voice this concern, how can you even realize you need to acknowledge it? That's it's a perpetual thing. Like, if you don't have the numbers, you're not going to have those complaints. And
right.
I feel like the smaller the amount of representation these Black students have, the more intense these experiences are.
Yeah. And I feel like even with our school, I feel like with this movement that's kind of going on right now, the fact that there are a lot of white students like speaking out and saying, hey, that's not right, versus a couple years ago when the same thing kind of happened, these same white students weren't speaking out. So our numbers just stayed small. So now the fact that I think we're having like a bigger impact because people are speaking up and saying it, this shouldn't happen. So I don't know.
It's important. And I don't know if any of you, I think one of you attended, was it Kietana? The community conversation. Mm-hmm. And I talked about how KU needs to be more socially accountable. And socially accountability means really taking the voice of people who have historically experienced trauma, socially, spiritually. First of all, acknowledging that historic, spiritual, and social trauma, and saying it out loud, and then putting things into place policy-wise and in your processes. So avoiding tokenism. I don't know if you ever get the feeling sometimes that you're in a place because you're the Black face that will represent and show, hey, look, we're doing a good thing. Absolutely. So yeah, we're socially responsible as an organization, but are you really, really looking at how, at the not just the monetary case for diversity, but the moral case for diversity? Because to me, an organization like KU is the social unit of accountability in our society. Mm-hmm. So if our organizations don't look like how our society needs to look, then how is it going to happen?
Absolutely.
You know, things like,
okay.
Yeah. And then do you guys feel like you're going to school in a psychologically safe environment? Do you feel like your school is doing that for you? Do you feel like you can voice your opinions and say your piece and you can put your mask aside when needed?
So the last part, no. I was like, I do not feel like I can put my mask aside. But I think having a woman of color as a therapist at KUMC is my saving grace. Yeah. That is, Dr. Sparkman Barnes is probably the main place where I feel safest on voicing my opinion.
And I know for me, a lot of times in small group, sometimes like when I do want to like call, because we have like cases that are problematic sometimes. I just feel like I'm always having to be like, that's problematic. And like, I don't feel like safe or not supported in some of my like decisions. And I hate that I'm the only one who always feels like, hey, I need to say something. And it just, I don't know, like psychologically, I feel like I can't always voice my opinion the way I should.
And I feel like in that you start to trust yourself less. Yeah. Like you're like, am I like overanalyzing? Maybe I'm making a bigger deal out of it than it should be. And then that carries into like test taking. And
that's
like that.
That is, you've just described stereotypes, right?
Man.
So all of that, and then it now starts showing up in your performance. Your academic performance. It now starts showing up in your decision making, which becomes shaky, that kind of thing. And one of the things that I was part of a meeting yesterday with the medical students from the diversity, I forget what it's called. But one of the things that I talked about that Maria, Dr. Alonso, and I are really working to do is train our faculty better. So that when you're in small group or when you're in your CBCLs, or when, you don't feel the burden of representing your whole race. You don't feel awkward or unsure or whatever it is, because it's being facilitated properly and people are recognizing, we need to create a space where both white students and Black students can talk, and it also needs to be a safe space for this to happen and all of that. So training is paramount, not just for you guys in regards to being educated, but even for me as a faculty member, I also need to feel safe. Yeah. And oftentimes, like, I will never forget, I did implicit bias training for promotion and tenure faculty. And I described, it was actually one of the CBCLs where Maria and I walked around, and I think I've told this story. We were going around each of the rooms, listening in on conversations. We walked into one room and a faculty member looked up and said, "Oh, are you here to fix the heat?"
What?
Yes.
Oh, girl.
Wait, like, let me just clear it. Like the heat in the room?
Yes.
Like
So we had just started using the new building and the aircon was off. So it was very warm in the building. When Maria and I walked into the room, the faculty member said, "Oh, good. Are you here to fix the AC?" And never met this faculty member. If I had, I can't remember. But I am going to tell you something. You guys see how I show up in spaces.
Yeah.
I am not
just thinking that you were dressed, your hair. We just said it before.
You don't look like you're fixing me. You're bringing me.
That's why I asked. I was like, is she fixing the heat in the room?
So we hear a gasp from a student who knows Dr. Alonso Luases really well. And I look at Maria and I'm like, is she talking? She's talking to us? And then I said, I am Dr. Mabachi and this is Dr. Luases and we are the ones who created this learning experience. And we're just here checking in on you and the students.
Oh, wow. So how did she pick her face up?
Woo! Difficult. But I tell you that story because I told that story to promotion and tenure committee. And at the end of it, an older white faculty member said, "But is it that bad?"
Are you serious?
See, after you have worked this hard to get a PhD,
and gone that bad. You are so good. Shout out to you for keeping.
Oh, I'm mad.
So when I say that we need to continue educating and we need to continue having these conversations, you guys with your colleagues, with your family, with people in your community, I need to keep having those conversations, even though sometimes it's really hard. This is why. Yeah. Because people live in their different realities and in their different bubbles. And I will venture to say some of them are really invested in the system continuing it as it is.
Mm-hmm. I have a
question. Yeah, go ahead.
So with the education component, I know like a lot of minorities kind of feel like I've been speaking out. I'm exhausted. I'm tired of speaking out for a whole race. So what would you say to those people? Because I know me and Kia, like our opinions with that, we don't mind speaking out. Like we believe in this cause. We believe that there can be change and we'd love to see the people under us have that change that we didn't have. So we're going to speak out regardless. And so when people kind of bring that argument to us, I just don't understand it because I'm like,
I mean, I see it as a privilege. Like, I'm proud to advocate for Black people all the time. Like, that is why I'm here. So, and like, I see myself being a Black mother one day. Mm-hmm. And that is why I feel so impassioned to advocate for these type of things. But other people might not feel that responsibility. So how do you help us be more?
Yeah. You know, one of the things I try and remind myself is that not everybody is as mentally resilient to deal with this and to have these conversations as maybe I am. The other thing is not everybody feels equipped in regards to knowledge, in regards to words, discourse, narrative to talk about it with others. They just don't have that self-confidence. Mm-hmm. Also, we are product of the systems we grew up in. Mm-hmm. So there are many, many Black folk, including myself sometimes, who think like racists, because we've been brought up thinking about these things and we need to do the work of decolonizing our mind before we can also start helping others decolonize their minds. Mm-hmm. And you guys are so good at putting these things into words and talking about it and advocating. But that takes work. I bet you guys do lots of reading. I bet you guys do lots, self-reflection, talking, etc. Yeah. It takes work, and that's exhausting in itself. Mm-hmm. So it's not just white folk who have to do the work of becoming anti-racist, but Black folk have to do the work of decolonizing their minds. Both those pieces of work take a lot out of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's true.
Right? Mm-hmm. So I try and remind myself about that when I come into contact with Black people who are like, it's not really my problem. I am too tired, I'm too exhausted, I'm too whatever, because it's real. The other thing that came to mind, and when I was thinking about your email talking about mental resiliency, sometimes people don't create those safe spaces for each other. Because we're often vulnerable outside of ourselves, it's often fraught. We forget, I need to have my bubble with people who think like me. I need to have those things where I can go into it and remove my mask and feel safe. Like probably you two feel with each other, or I feel with my friend Kylie. And then we need to seek out allies. So I have a story where I think I was a new faculty member and I found out that I was earning $10,000 less than my colleague who started after me.
Oh, wow.
That's a lot.
And I had been trying to correct this.
Right.
And nothing was happening. And I was just like beside myself. I was just emotional over it. My colleague who's white was like, when she found out, she's like, what? This is ridiculous. And she went and she said something, and you guys, within a month, it was commensurate.
Wow.
Our pay was commensurate.
Wow.
She had a voice that I don't have, but she also stepped in when she saw that I was ready to give up. So having those things in place is really important as well, and gives you that courage and that energy to continue having these conversations.
So it's interesting that you kind of mentioned that, because I feel like Black Lives Matter has been a movement for quite some time. It's been loud, it's been vocal, and I feel like the reason this has gone to the extent that it has is because of white allies who have taken this to heart and taking this specific case or these specific cases seriously.
Yeah.
So I'm somewhat conflicted because I feel like I don't want this to be a moment in time. I don't want it to be, oh, remember that time when we rallied and we protested and we have all these pictures on Facebook. I want it to be something that is taught to their children and continue to, and honestly, I want to see it to where people are like, we need to correct history books. We need to correct, you know what I mean? Go back through judicial cases and see who was convicted for whistling at a white woman or something like that. And I think those are things that, like, I don't think white people realize the veins that racism has in this country. And I think it's really, it's starting to shed that light, but how do we kind of work in that space? And because it only means more education for us.
Yeah, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. Absolutely. Dr. Kendi says this. I have said this because I work in public health, and we're fans of policy and changing policies around things. In this country, we focus a lot on individual behavior. So we focus a lot on individual behaviors of racism and individual ideas and ideologies around racism. We don't focus on the systems that allow those behaviors to continue. We have to move from individual behaviors to systemic racism and oppression, and start unpacking that. Not even unpacking it, I say dismantling it, right? Because it was built to serve one group of people. And this thing of fiddling with it and sort of trying to modify it doesn't seem to have been working. We need to just relook at the whole thing. So we have to look at our education system. What are the books that are being used to teach our students? What is the kind of communication? What are the kinds of discourses are we having around race, around issues of poverty, issues of incarceration? What does it look like to apply to a medical program? What is that? Who gets in? Who doesn't get in? Same thing for me and faculty. Who gets promoted? I have to tell you, it is so disheartening how many faculty of color keep leaving KU.
Oh, wow. That hurts
right?
Here. It's true. It's true. I mean, but the fact that we're here and we need them, we look for them.
Yeah, we're searching. It's so bad because one of our classmates, she's Hispanic, and we were talking to her about like finding mentors and like how we found our mentors, and she was like, "Do you guys know like a Hispanic surgery like faculty that I could find?" And we were like sitting there thinking, like going through our phones.
She was looking for female.
Yeah, female too. And we couldn't think of any. I don't even think we could think of a Hispanic.
We had to Google.
Oh my gosh.
And we were like basically unsuccessful.
Exactly. And not saying you like need a mentor in who's the same race or as you.
But that representation.
Yeah. And it's nice to just be able to take off your mask and ask them, if I do this, will I be judged because of this?
If they realize my accent, if I like mispronounce details that like a majority or just someone of a different race may not be able to relate.
Right. But it's so much harder to examine policies and processes. Wow. It takes work. And like I said, anti-racist, creating anti-racist policies is exhausting and takes work, and people don't want to do it. I'm just going to say that out loud. People would rather do the surface stuff. People would rather engage in tokenism. People would rather engage in, we created a cabinet, a diversity cabinet, or we created this. But how enduring is it? What are the long-term goals? Like you said, you don't want it to just be this snapshot in Facebook. We did this, we marched, whatever, it's over. If you're truly accountable, you're thinking about it even generationally, because we're undoing hundreds of years of these shenanigans, right?
Yeah. So, and that's the hard part. Like, I don't want our allies to get exhausted, because it's like, I've been Black my whole life. I don't know. I'm always tired, but like once you start picking up these burdens and you realize, wow, this is a lot more than just march today and then like forget about it. And I don't want to scare them away. I don't want them, but I feel like even now, so we had a really beautiful, we did the white coats for Black Lives thing. Yeah. And it was really moving and it was really beautiful, but we were also looking at it like, well, all the Black students were kind of in the back. So how much have we really taken this into our hearts? Like how and I think it's just us looking at it because we're Black students and they don't even think like that. Yeah. But it's like, if you're not thinking like that, are you really picking up what we're putting down?
Yeah. And to go off of that too, I think one thing I'm really struggling with is like, are people actually understanding the message? Because I sent Kia a screenshot, but I had a friend reach out to me, and I like on my iPhone, I saw the very beginning of the message, and it was really sweet. And she was just reaching out to me because like she said like I was really close to her at one point in life, and she was like, oh, my family's like rooting for you, like we love you, like we've been praying for you. And then I open the message and I read the rest of it, and then she's like, all lives matter, I just want you to know that. And I'm like I'm like, wait, like what? And so I'm just like really conflicted, because I'm like, are people actually like doing this because they care, they want to see change, or are they doing it because it's a social it's a movement right now, and they just, it's like the snapshot
it's a wave.
They want to join the wave, feel bad because everyone feels bad right now, or do you actually care? Because that message just really showed me like you really don't understand what's going on, girl. Yeah.
Right. And there's a difference between wanting to do good, be seen to do good, and to truly understand what it is you're doing good about.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the reasons why Maria and I are so sort of adamant about trying to weave the issues of social determinants, social justice, race, and diversity and inclusion in the medical school curriculum is so that people can understand even the basics, can understand what's the difference between equality and equity. A lot of people don't know that. People need to understand, what does white fragility truly mean? Where does it come from? Like, we have to bring in some of that historical stuff into, this is why Black folk don't want to come into the hospital. They don't trust you.
Yeah. Period.
Do you blame them? If you actually pay attention to what has been systemically happening to them over hundreds of years. But I don't think that deeper understanding is there. But this is where our education systems come in. This is where our church systems come in. This is where some of these social structures have opportunities and spaces to talk about it and insert it into whatever it is they're teaching, doing, working around. This is where workplaces can start talking about this, if they truly want to be socially accountable, that is.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that last part is really who's in place and who has the microphone. Like, if the head honcho doesn't want to talk about it, nobody's going to hear about it.
Yeah. That's it.
And I think that is the case at our school, particularly because I feel like a lot of our faculty who are white or not people of color, they really do are passionate about this. They want to talk about it, and they're willing to listen. But I think it's just like the sprinkle of the people with the big pockets and the big voice who don't want to talk about it, who don't think it's an issue, who don't think it's the focus of the biggest concern right now. And
yeah. And I was gonna say, adding to your education component of that, I know for me, because I am African, and like growing up in an African household, like we didn't have these conversations about like the different historical things that have gone on, because like my parents never experienced that, you know? So like, and we weren't talking about it in school. So like, I knew I was Black. I knew the conversations we did have at home were kind of like, you are going to be judged differently because you're Black, but that's kind of the extent of it. And I didn't really have that education until I got to college, and I took a sociology of medicine class. And my teacher, like, she made us read so many books. Like, we read Henrietta Lacks books. We read like so many different books, and that's what like really opened my eyes to like all of these things. So like I began to do like my own education about it. But I really don't know if it was for that class. Like, I'm sure I would have met Kia at some point. But before that, like I knew it was a thing, but I didn't have the education or the knowledge or like even the background or history to know what was actually going on. And I just saw myself as the other, but I didn't know why, you know? So I think that's really hard for the majority to even realize, like, they're not even the other.
That is complex.
Yeah.
That is
so they don't feel like they even have to like do the research. And so like, I know we're kind of working on this with our school, but one of the things like we kind of brought up to the faculty was having like reading and literature in the curriculum that kind of forces this like knowledge and education. And it just like blows my mind, like the fact that people wouldn't want to
do that research themselves.
Yeah.
Especially going into medicine.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's because medicine is where you want to save people, isn't it? It's where you want to do good. So you think you try but it just goes back to that issue of, as a public health specialist, I don't care what you do as an individual. What I care is what we do as a group and as a population. And if I can direct what we're doing and what we're thinking as a group, then it will slowly change your individual behavior. And I always use the example of tobacco. When public health finally figured out how to change, tobacco laws, policies around smoking in public places, whatever, human behavior has changed. We now know it's no longer acceptable to smoke inside, whereas before you could smoke in an airplane in midair. It was so but it took years to be able to change these policies, because there are very powerful people and powerful lobbyists in place preventing it from happening. But once it happened, our smoking habits and behaviors and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable has changed drastically, and we can do it with other things as well. We can do it. Yeah.
I think that is a amazing example. What I struggle with is the fact that it is that easy, I feel like, with systemic racism to correct it. I feel like it would be that easy. But the only thing is they see that as competition. If you open a space for more people to fill these spaces where they should, because they've been denied them for centuries prior to the point we were allowed to have them, then that's more competition for the majority. And that's a threat to the estates, to the wealth, the familial wealth that they have, the generational wealth. And that is where I struggle, because it's like, is it that bad to think that my thing is your wealth that flimsy? Is it that easy to tear down the tons of work your family must have put in to establish this point, or you as an individual? You know what I mean? Like, I think it shouldn't be that way, but obviously it is.
Well, and I think with what you said too, I think that's more like people know it's going to take certain powers away from them. Like, one of the faculty at our school literally looked at me and another minority student, and they said, like, with STEP becoming like pass or fail, they don't know if they would have been in the high position that they are today, because someone else of a minority might have taken their spot. And they, like, when they said that, like, it made me think, okay, at least they know they have that power, but what are you doing to fix it? Because you clearly don't care. You can make that statement all you want.
Well,
but
in what way did you
that power?
Yeah, and what did you even advocate for that?
Yeah,
because if you know that's the thing that's keeping minorities out of your chair,
yeah,
you're part of the problem.
Yeah, and they literally looked at us and they were like, "I'm good at standardized testing, so that's why I'm here." And we're like, "Thanks."
No, that's not why you're there. You're there for more than just standardized testing, actually.
Yeah.
You're there because of generations of a kind of support that other groups just haven't had to be able to get to where you are. And actually, this idea that if more people are at the table, then I have less is a misconception. It is just based on the narrative I told you earlier that has been going on for hundreds of years, that, people in power have been really invested in. If we let these people in, they will take it all away from us, or they will ruin it, or they will destroy it, or whatever it is. It's absolutely not true.
Mm-hmm.
There is a reason why we want certain groups to not have as much as us. There's a reason why we want to have a working class that is mostly of a certain race that are doing basically our bidding. There's a reason why we're trying to keep these things in place. Right?
Yeah.
And so it's just part of that narrative that they have to sort of now start getting rid of and engage in that anti-racist work. And frankly, I just don't know if some people want to.
Why would they?
Exactly.
So long. I mean, really, if I've been eating at a buffet my entire life and now they tell me I have to pay per item, I'm not doing it.
But look, if I knew that the real story was this, I could continue eating at that buffet, and I could even actually get more because now we're all playing. That's what I would want.
Yeah.
And that's what would actually happen. We would prosper more.
Absolutely.
There's only plus things that can happen from engaging everybody and having everybody at the table, because now we're using all of our brain power.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
But because I've bought hook, line, and sinker into the narrative that these people are going to take away from me, I continue to behave that way. That's why poor white people will continue to vote against themselves.
They're not ready for that.
To vote for help. We'll continue
again.
of voting for policies that are, it's like biting off your nose to spite your face.
Mm-hmm.
Things that would benefit them socially, they vote against. Because they think that, if we vote for this, then minority folk will have it. And we don't want that.
Absolutely.
It's very true.
Right. Yeah. I forget the author, and I'll try and get it to you, but there's an author who talks about how white people are basically voting against their self-interests in order to continue the racist narrative.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a truly fascinating book.
So exhausting.
Yeah.
That's great. And it's subconscious. They don't even realize.
This is it.
Yeah.
It's absolutely subconscious. Yeah. So let's not underestimate our socialization, our identity formation, and what we're invested in to keep those identities intact.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We hit on basically everything.
I know. I guess, do you have any advice for, pre-med, medical, or future
undergrad, high school
students who are passionate about this, and what they can do to kind of push this agenda? Because one thing that's kind of scary is at the beginning of this movement, word was going around that if you are in medical school, if you do show up at these protests, people should see your face and you get arrested, that's going to hurt your career. There was word that if your name got on like a list and like white supremacists knew what was going on, they were trying to ruin your career. So like, I think a lot of people in this space are scared to speak out with what's going on. And that's one thing I struggled with, because I'm passionate about this stuff, but I'm nervous a little bit.
You're passionate about medicine too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I kind of struggled with that, because like, this, like at the beginning of this journey, one thing like school expressed was like, if you're passionate about it, like those passions are going to be like drawn out in medical school. And that's something like I'm having to like suppress because of my skin color. And it's kind of
yeah, it's scary. I would also interrogate some of those things and ask, is it really true?
Yeah.
You know, for sure. But it's definitely scary. What's the advice? You know, one of the things that you guys have talked about and I truly believe in is finding those mentors, which is sometimes really hard. And it's never too early to find a mentor. In the beginning, it might not be somebody of your race, hopefully somebody of your gender, but trying to seek those things out. I think that's why a lot of youth programs really sort of try and connect youth with somebody that may resonate with them, you know, who's a bit older, because you just never, because of that sort of guidance and potential guidance. And I challenge you guys as amazing, smart, beautiful young Black women to be mentors to those kids, because truly it starts there. By the time I see students in uni, sometimes it's almost too late. You know, it was sometimes so heartbreaking when I would have a Black student who had been passed through school, maybe because they were a good athlete, who could barely read, couldn't string a sentence together, had never had a positive sort of mentor in their lives to figure out, how do I conduct myself in an academic center of learning that to all intents and purposes is designed for white people. It's not designed for me to be here. It would just break my heart. And so it's like, how do we get to them before? I know people hate being activists, but I almost feel like it's our duty or whatever to sort of help, if we're going to create the kind of generational wealth, the kind of empowerment in our community that we want to happen for the next couple of centuries. It's just part of the work we have to do, and we can't shy away from that. You know, the other thing that I really am learning, and I've just started doing a course, is approaching things from a spirit of positivity and hope. And where spirit is defined as that sense of having purpose and meaning, that sense of value as a member of society, and that what you say matters. And I'm going back to my, I am enough, I was enough, I will always be enough, and always believing in that. And then doing my work from that. It's a strengths-based perspective. It's a perspective of where I'm not coming from a place of lack, but coming from a place in the belief that I can contribute, in a belief that my community already has the strengths to do what it needs to do to get to where we want to go. And I find that people seem to separate that out of education. People seem to separate that out of research. Can you imagine if your educators approached you from a place of spirit and then provided you with your information that you needed to become awesome doctors within that framework?
Yeah.
That sounds unrealistic. It just sounds unbelievable.
I know.
Like a fairy tale.
I know, it's almost like a fairy tale. But that's what I'm trying to do. And that's also part of the training that we're trying to provide to our fellow faculty.
That's awesome. And I think a lot of them would be willing if they were just in that mindset. If it was just brought to their attention, like, this